let me go to this idea of professionals versus amateurs. We understand the power of government lies with the people. This is government of and for and by the people. Got it. And because of that, we have representative government. We have a republic. The idea here in the state of Colorado, for instance, and pretty much every city council member, is we elect somebody to make those decisions for us. We don't have the time to get involved in the nitty-gritty of each and every bill that passes through. There's at least 500 bills a year that go through the state house. People don't have the time. And people act rather emotionally about those issues without going through perhaps a lot of the unforeseen consequences of any initiative. We looked at Amendment 23 where they said this is not going to cause a budgetary problem. And we believed them, apparently. And then lo and behold, just a few years later, it caused a massive budgetary problem because most of the money was forced to go to K-12, and therefore higher ed and other services had to be drastically cut. Well, if the legislators were left to make that decision, they would not have made that decision because they saw that coming. Do people really have the wisdom to understand? And I'm not saying that people are stupid. I'm not saying that they don't have a right to have opinions on these particular policy issues. But when you get into the crafting and the nitty-gritty of how a government works, the policymakers who are there day in and day out understand if you tweak this, it pops something else over here. Citizens don't. They read a one-line description of the bill, they vote yes or no, and therefore they make changes that future generations are stuck with. Can these amateurs, can the people really have the wisdom to make these tough calls? Yes.
Next question. No, absolutely. Absolutely. And compare citizen legislating through the initiative process to legislatures. And I think you'll find that the big mistakes that have been made in our history have not been made at the ballot box by the voters. We've made mistakes. Some that maybe we thought were a good idea and turned out not to be. Maybe we voted against them, but the majority voted for them. It's not that voters can't make mistakes, they can. But they size up these proposals very effectively. And there's all kinds of academic studies that have looked at initiatives that have passed, and they go back a few years later and they poll people and they say, what do you think? Did you vote the way that you thought you were voting? Did you understand it? Did they somehow trick you with an initiative? And what they find is that the people like what they voted for. They're not tricked. However, oftentimes what comes out of a legislature, people do feel tricked. And so we're never going to have a system, and no one advocates it, where the voters are making every decision. Frankly, the voters don't want to make every decision. We do believe in hiring people to do a lot of the nitty-gritty. But when there are big issues that decide policy for a state or a city, it ought to be the voters making those decisions. And the more power we can put in the voters' hands to make the big decisions and set policy, the better off we're going to be with government. And then, of course, the everyday running of government, that can be done by the professionals. But there's another issue here that somehow the voters won't know enough. Well, the professionals have a lot more access to the media, and I'm talking about politicians, the folks who work for the state government, folks who work in think tanks, professors at universities. They have a lot more access to the media. They certainly can get their message out if they think an initiative is a bad idea or a good idea. And the voters soak it all in, and I think by and large they make very good decisions.
By and large, they make very good decisions. Occasionally, they make very bad decisions. The idea with the initiative process is that people finally have this safety valve. All right, we got that. We're there. Let me ask you about the ease of getting these things on the ballot. Last year here in Colorado, we had an enormous, what people thought was an enormous amount of ballot measures, including one that I was involved with. There were also a bunch that were put on, and it's blackmail. And what we saw was that the unions, which didn't like my initiative, nor did they like the Right to Work initiative, put on 4 economy-killing measures. If any one of these passed, we could turn out the lights in Colorado's industries. I mean, these were things where you couldn't fire anybody except for just cause, which would be a boon for lawyers. Another one that said employees could sue for just about anything, including being unhappy in the workplace. I mean, just wild laws that that the proponents really didn't want to get on the ballot. They knew they were bad laws, but they wanted to use them for blackmail to get off the things that they didn't like. So now we find this Russian roulette that happens with the initiative process. Is it possible that we have too many initiatives because people can buy their way onto the ballot, and then we start playing these shell games of, all right, you're going to do that? Well, I'm going to do one that's even worse, and you're going to have to pull your initiative and if you want me to pull mine. Isn't that a danger?
Yeah, I think what happened last election in Colorado was unseemly because you had this big business versus big labor and deal cutting and people putting initiatives on the ballot and then pulling them off. In many states, you don't have the ability. If you put an initiative on the ballot, it now belongs to the people, and the proponents cannot pull it back off the ballot. And that's worth considering here in Colorado. But when you have a lot of initiatives on the ballot, especially if the voters perceive it not as a lot of great ideas that people wanted to bring forth, but a lot of political, game playing, those initiatives tend to go down. And you had 4 withdrawn. You had a number of other measures go down to defeat. So, I think the voters deal with it pretty effectively. And when too many initiatives get put on the ballot, because they tend to lose, people who put initiatives on the ballot for the next cycle tend to say, gee, maybe we ought to be a little bit more careful. So, in politics, people sometimes are looking for the perfect. It's not going to happen. The initiative process, I think, is the best thing since sliced bread. But perfect, it's not going to be that. What it is a critical check that allows reforms of government that otherwise could not be considered because they cut against the self-interest of those who have their hands on the legislative levers. Without the initiative, there's no way to do a lot of the things that we need to do. And I look at what's happening around the country now, and you see more and more power being concentrated. We're seeing the government do things without transparency. And I'm talking about largely in Washington, with trillions and trillions of dollars being spent against the majority opinion in the country. And then I look at the local level where people do have the ability to use initiatives, or the state level in the states that have that. And the government simply couldn't get away with that kind of stiff arming of the voters. We have to have a process, I think, where citizens can make the critical changes that need to be made. They won't be made any other way.
Those who are critical about the initiative process say, look at how it's cluttering up our ballots. But when you take a look at how many of those initiatives have actually passed, here in Colorado, it's only a handful. Compared to the 600, 700 bills that go through the state legislature, the handful of initiatives we vote on every other year, maybe 1, maybe 2 pass. The rest usually go down to defeat. So it's not as if this is changing lots and lots of laws. It is just changing a few every now and then.
That's exactly right. In fact, if you look, the average legislature is going to deal with more laws in a given session than the 24 states that have the initiative process have passed in the entire 100+ years of history dealing with initiatives. So voters have used this process sparingly. They're not passing new laws all the time. They're doing it when there's a critical need that causes someone to say, I can't get this done through my city council. I can't get this done through my state representative. We have to let the voters decide. To me, it's it's the American way, and the resistance to it is so strong from the folks who have the legislatures locked up that to me it gives me a little added
because those in power don't want to give up their power, and the initiative process does it. All right, let's attack this one.